There is no accountability and no transparency in government anymore. The machine that we're trying to beat at the moment is basically big government, big corporations, big super funds, big media.
What is stopping that happening in Australia? Why can't we get Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer, Gerard Rennick, why can't we get them to all band together to cause a serious threat against Liberal and Labor?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Former Senator Gerard Rennick is an Australian politician and finance executive who represented Queensland in the Senate from 2019 to 2025, known for his focus on economic management and government accountability.
In 2024, he founded the People First Party to advocate for small businesses, economic sovereignty, and policies that put everyday Australians first.
Super funds control $3 trillion in capital. Right? If you control $3 trillion in capital, you control the economy, and yet you have no say over where your life savings go or who manages your money. Where's the accountability there?
Housing, and then you got the 5% deposits, no LMI, etc. What's your view on that? The good, the bad, and the ugly?
Well, there's no good, it's bad, and it's ugly. It's a classic example of...
If you could change one thing about how politics works in Australia, what would it be?
There's a couple of things here and this is a good one to throw in, is should we have compulsory voting?
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Unemployable podcast. Today we have a special guest that is joining us for the second time within the last 7 months. We've got Gerard Rennick here. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Mark, James, thanks for coming. We're going to take this one. Adam's not here for this one, so we're going to take it over and let's outperform the first one.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I wasn't here on the first one, so...
The first podcast was a great success. We had great views, all organic views, a lot of messages. People love these political podcasts. And for those of you guys that don't know who Gerard Rennick is, Gerard served as a senator for Queensland from 2019 to 2025. He was elected to the Senate in 2019 at the 2019 federal election as a member of the Liberal National Party of Queensland, and he sat with the Liberal Party in Parliament. He then resigned in 2024 to form the People's First Party, but unfortunately failed to retain his seat at this most recent election in 2025. So we thought, you know what, there's a lot that has happened since Gerard has been on the podcast last. We've obviously had an election, and there's lots of topics that people are unhappy with. Some are happy with, so we're going to discuss some of those. On the last pod, we talked a bit about tariffs, having a fair go for local businesses, superannuations, renewables, and energy. And today we'll talk about some other stuff. So, Gerard, I guess, how's the last 7 months been for you? Obviously, since the election, the disappointment, putting all that work and effort in. Tell us a little bit on where your headspace has been over the last 7 months.
Well, my headspace has basically been focused on building a machine to beat the machine. As you know, it's no secret I lost my Senate position in the election. That was kind of to be expected, given that I didn't get pre-selected again by the Liberals, which was kind of to be expected, given that I withheld my vote over the COVID vaccines. And it's very difficult for an independent, to get up in the Senate. You've got to get 14%, especially here in Queensland. We've got a lot of, we have Clive Palmer, got 3.8% of the vote. Then you've got also the One Nation machine up here as well. So we, there's a lot of competition for that last spot. So having said that, though, I was kind of braced myself for the result. But what I didn't expect out of the election was the enormous amount of support and what I call active support by the people, many who have become now members of People First, who actually got out and manned the booths. So we effectively now, I've had senior ministers from Labor say to me they were surprised at how many people went out and manned booths on behalf of People First. We basically outmanned One Nation, who've been around for 25 years at the time of the election. And that is what's inspired me to keep the party going. Initially, I had to start the party to get my name above the line. But the active enthusiasm and the energy of our members is what's inspired me to keep the party going. And because these people want to see a better life for their children, and they're prepared to go out and do something about it. And that's what we desperately need in this country, better policies and better solutions. And more importantly, just as importantly, a vision. which today's politicians lack.
So just before we go down the rabbit hole with specific items, what does it, from a broad strokes perspective, but from 10,000 foot, what does it look like for People First Party now that you have lost your Senate seat? What's it look like till next election? Is it you're obviously building the party, or is it?
Yep. So it's just starting branches. So we've already started a number of branches here in Australia. I've just about a month ago did a 2-week trip, 6,000 kilometres down through New South Wales, ACT, Victoria and South Australia. We set up a number of branches there. We've got about 15 branches here in Queensland. I'm off to Perth on Friday. I've set up, the branch is already set up in Perth, but we're going to do a number of functions there in Perth. So the next couple of years is just continue to build the membership, and that is what we set out to do. So my goal has been from the get-go is to set out an active, vibrant grassroots membership. And this is one of the problems. The Labor Party has a top-down approach, so their grassroots membership, they've got a lot of members, but they're not the ones that drive the policy making. It's all top-down. The Liberal Party is effectively rotting, just a dead rotting carcass. Their membership, the average median age of members in the LNP here in Queensland is 72. So
Average.
so the median. So 50% of the people in the party are older than 72. So their branch meetings, they tend to, they'll hold their branch meetings, but they won't get actively engaged in the community. One Nation, up until we started branches, didn't have an active grassroots campaign, movement. That was all top down from Pauline and James Ashby. They have now adopted our approach of branches because they realised we were a threat to them, especially after the recent election, whereby we basically outmanned them on the booths. They're having a lot of success as well, which will help. It will send a message to the Liberal Party to lift their game. So the Liberal Party are under severe, attacks from both One Nation and ourselves, just through the membership. And that was one of the things when I wanted to get active, was to basically gut the Liberal Party of their membership and get the active people coming to People First in order to basically speed up the renewal process. The Liberal Party, in my view, as I said, is, it's a dead rotting, it's a rotting carcass and it needs renewal. And by getting new people in at the grassroots level who are active, hopefully it will be the spark that, gets the right of centre movement moving again.
So it's full steam ahead, in short.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've been working, I've hardly had a day off since I've stopped being a senator. I'm literally on the computer in between school pickup, drop off, pickup. The whole time, just obviously it's a lot of people management, different type of work. It's actually more stressful than being a senator because you have to manage people's expectations, and that's the nature of volunteering. It's, you have to be respectful of everyone. They're all volunteers and we are very respectful of our members, and, it's incumbent upon all of our members to treat each other with respect. But yeah, it's full on and it will be that way for at least another 3 years.
This is a 2-day property development event in March on the 7th and 8th at the Mondrian, the newest luxury hotel here in Burleigh Heads on the Gold Coast. You'll see how developments are found, how they are funded, and how they are actually delivered. But don't ask us if it's worth it. Check out the people who've already been doing it.
Have you got any partnerships from here?
Yeah, absolutely. We are JVing with a weapon from Melbourne and building a really awesome relationship with him.
As usual, all the Unemployable events are fantastic.
It's just amazing. The community's great.
My mind is a bit blown by the end of the day. Lots of information, and it's been awesome talking to everybody else.
I've just put in an offer today, first offer. It's good to take that first step. We'll see where it lands. I think it could be a pretty good deal.
A lot of people I've done business with in the past, I found that they've overpromised and underdelivered, and I feel it's the opposite with Unemployable.
I had a really good time, great connections, met some awesome people.
They're getting me in the room, like with people who can help me and in making introductions.
Everyone's just on the same playing field and everyone's out there just to help each other and have a bit of a conversation.
Got so many connections and I'm happy to be part of Unemployable.
It's hard to put into words what happens when you get yourself in a room with like-minded people. You just walk on, you can feel the energy, you can feel the momentum. Everyone I spoke to today just had the biggest dreams, the biggest vision. It's so inspiring.
Some of those people that you've just seen have made offers. Some have found partners. Some are actually doing real deals right now. And they all say the same thing. I'm glad I went. If development is on your mind, this is the weekend. You need to stop waiting. Click on the link below and let's start developing together.
Can I ask potentially an overly simplistic question? from when I turned 18 to the last election, to up before the last election, I voted Liberal because I've always wanted to be a business person. And I assumed that Liberal had my interests at hand. This is the first election where I didn't vote for Liberal. I went in to vote for Libertarians, and I actually saw your name with the Libertarians on the ballot paper. I thought, great, because I love the podcast you did with Unemployable, and I voted for yourself and Libertarians. One thing that I think anecdotally, so I don't have any facts to support it, but anecdotally, I'm seeing that you've got, and we've had some of these people on the podcast, Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer, yourself, Libertarians. You've got all these smaller independents that are starting to build a base.
Yeah.
And what I fear is that they're creating more fractions because the support that could be going away from Liberal or Labor, some's going to Clive Palmer, some's going to Gerard Rennick, some's going to One Nation.
Yeah.
And none of these small independents are getting enough of a vote to kind of push forward. In the USA, and I know the USA is very different, but you had RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek, you had all these kind of up-and-coming entrepreneurs and well-presented personalities running their own kind of independent race. And then Trump was able to do something incredible. He was able to bring them all together and ban them under his banner, and they were able to win the election that many thought they probably wouldn't win. What is stopping that happening in Australia? Why can't we get Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer, Gerard Rennick, and all these independents that are starting to build a base that, in my opinion, speaking to a lot of them, have similar policies and similar views about the way the country should be heading? Why can't we get them to all band together to cause a serious threat against Liberal and Labor? Yeah,
that's a good question. And I agree with your point of view. We should merge. I flew to Sydney 2 months ago, my own coin today, on a Sunday, to talk to other minor parties. Clive, I'm not sure was invited, but One Nation was invited. They sent a message saying they no longer see themselves as a minor party, and they didn't basically attend. And Pauline has said on other podcasts that she's not having other minor parties at a table.
Just steel man that for us. Why would she say that? What's in her best interest for her to say that? I don't want.
Well, I mean, I can only speculate.
Yeah.
But I said, the One Nation has always run a what you would call a process whereby they generate a lot of money out of elections, and we've never seen the books. So this is my problem with One Nation, is they're not transparent with what happens to the money. They lost $500,000 a few years ago and wouldn't explain to anyone how they lost $500,000 on investment they made on an tropical island off Queensland. We don't know. I don't know.
I can only speculate.
And that's the thing. So I think we do need to merge. I'm willing to merge. But it has to be, we all need to roll into a new party where we know who the state executive is. We know who the federal executive is. All the accounts are fully transparent. So, rumours of people having printing businesses and people charging royalties and that to the party to get their money back, that needs to change. That needs to be much more transparent. Candidates are being charged, thousands of dollars. They're getting to the 4% threshold where they get their money back. They're not being refunded. So these are the corporate governance issues that I had a problem with. So that's why I wouldn't join. I couldn't join One Nation last time because Malcolm was already on the ticket up here.
So could I? Would it be unfair to argue that One Nation and Clive and all these guys, if they weren't willing to join or merge within a new party that had a chance of actually disrupting something, that they're more interested in serving their own interests than the country's interests?
Well, you can speculate on that. I can tell you now, it's in my interest to merge because what I'm doing is killing me, right? So, I don't enjoy dealing with the party minutiae. I'm much more policy and vision and giving hope, and hopefully we'll talk about some policies later on.
Yep.
But, it's 6 or 7 different minor parties all doing admin, party admin, dealing with the AEC. It's a waste of energy, right? Like we should just have one streamlined back office and, bring in all our volunteers and have one, clear, identifiable badge brand at the election. So I can tell you, I'm not doing this for my ego because I'm done. I can retire.
And I definitely,
and I know you're not saying that. So I don't need to be in this. I'm not in this for the money. I'm not drawing a salary. I haven't taken a cent out of People First. I do use my own credit card and reimburse expenses, the IT. So I put all the IT software in that. We just reimburse that. So, but that's it. So all the money we basically collect from memberships and that is being directed into the 2028 federal election. So, and that's not just the cost to myself. My wife, who's also, could be a highly paid professional, has to stay at home because this weekend I'm at Perth. As I said a month ago, it's 2 weeks on the road. In a couple of weeks, I'll be doing another trip down North Queensland. So neither of us can work. So we are funding this out of our own capital to keep the party going in terms of opportunity cost, and even like cost of Perth and that I'm paying for myself. So I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm doing this because I want my children to have the same opportunities, our children to have the same opportunities as our forefathers gave to us. I want to stand up for Australians who stand up for themselves, and I want to get the government to serve the people, not control the people. And I want to see the policies that we have, and I believe the policies we have can turn this country around. I want to see them implemented, and I want to bring greater structure to the minor parties. So a lot of people get annoyed saying, I'm bagging out One Nation. All I'm trying to do is, if you want to have a party that can form government, we have to improve corporate governance inside the political parties, and it's the same for the Liberal Party.
That was my opinion after we interviewed Pauline. I thought, incredible woman, huge admiration, but I can't see how she would run the country. In my opinion, I couldn't see how she had the I don't want to say intellect, but the structure or the intellect in the policy issues to run the party.
Well, so there's two issues.
To run the country.
One's the policy solutions once you're in government, but then one's the party process as well.
Yeah.
So you've got to have proper pre-selections, okay? So one of the reasons why the LNP is falling, backwards or declining is that they have stopped having proper, genuine pre-selections that give grassroots members a say. Now, it's quite ironic they're talking about net zero today, but 4 years ago, last month, Morrison signed up to net zero in 2021. Now, he told the public in the election in 2019 that he would not sign up to net zero. He then backflipped, signed up to net zero, but even worse, he then went and shoehorned his New South Wales members, in particular Susan Ley and Alex Hawke, back into their seats, and the New South Wales members of the Liberal Party weren't given a say on whether or not these people should represent them. Right now, a bloke by the name of Matt Camazzulli, you might even want to think about getting him on the show, actually. He's good value. He tried to sue the party and said, no, we got to have pre-selections. He didn't have standing, so he couldn't get anywhere with it. But he was right, because members of Mitchell, which is Alex Hawke's seat, and members of Farrer, which was Susan's seat, were ropeable that Morrison had signed up to net zero and other reasons. And it was quite, I wouldn't say quite likely, but possible that they lost their position. Now, if you want to have if you believe in democracy, you've got to believe in democracy right through the entire political process. And this is very important because up until recently, the coalition had 60 safe seats. Labor has 60 safe seats. So out of the 150 seats in Parliament, 120 of those people that go to Parliament, they're not chosen on the day of the election because they're safe seats. They're chosen in the pre-selection process, right? You might have 30 swinging seats where it swings on the day of the election and that will decide the outcome. But and the other thing is those safe seats are generally where your ministers come from. The members have to have a say in who goes there. And it's the same for One Nation. Like, One Nation has just gone and shoehorned Sean Bell, who's been a staffer up here, is a Queenslander, into a New South Wales senator gig because the members of the One Nation in New South Wales weren't A, allowed to nominate themselves to be the Senate candidate, and then B, weren't given a say in who the Senate candidate should be. So yet again, this is what we want to do at People First, is if we say we believe in democracy and believe in giving people a say, that goes right through to the party process of giving them a say on who their who their executive is, giving them a say on the policy. And we're going to be live streaming some of our branch meetings next year talking about policy. There's one on the Gold Coast coming up on January the 28th, where we're going to be talking about all the different building codes. It's a real issue down here on the Gold Coast where many people, tradies, have to go across the border into New South Wales, the Tweed Heads and such. They've got to have two different licenses to work 20 kilometres apart, right? And most importantly, they have a say in who goes to represent them, in Canberra if we can manage to get someone up there one day. And that's important because when they then turn around, they say to you in pre-selection, we're not going to sign up to net zero. Then they go to Canberra and sign up to net zero. members have to be able to say, well, no, we want to see the back of you. You told us you weren't going to sign up to net zero and you did. So this is why it is so important to fix the process, the political process, because until we fix, and just to throw in on that, when I went and sued the party for dodging up my pre-selection, there are a number of irregularities. The party initially said, oh, we've got legal advice to say we can do what we can do. I then took them to court. They then turned around and argued that their own party's constitution was not justiciable. So in other words, they were saying that even though we will make the laws, we don't actually have to uphold our own laws inside the party. Now, so these political parties are just becoming a breeding ground for the winner takes all, no integrity, no standards, and you wonder why government's failing. Well, you've got to, and this is what we want to achieve at People First, apart from the policies that we'll jump into soon, hopefully, is that corporate governance inside the political system, because there is none.
You made a comment earlier, and you're saying, I'm building a machine to beat the machine. Explain the machine that you're trying to beat. Explain to the people the machine that you're referring to.
Great question, Eric. So the machine that we're trying to beat at the moment is basically big government, big corporations, big super funds, big media. What we want to do is now, we've seen this, hopefully I demonstrated it through my time as a senator in estimates. There is no accountability and no transparency in government anymore. You'd ask a question in estimates, they wouldn't answer. I mean, Albanese's just passed another law to make it harder to get information through freedom of information. Superannuation, if outside of self-managed super funds, if you've got your money in a retail or industry fund, to your listeners, how many of your listeners have ever voted on who goes onto the board of those superannuation funds? Probably no. And I think one or two super funds do have elections, but most of them don't. They're elected, not selected. Super funds control $3 trillion in capital. Right? If you control $3 trillion in capital, you control the economy, and yet you have no say over where your life savings go or who manages your money. Where's the accountability there? Right? RBA. Who these people control the price of money on the first Tuesday. Well, it's not the first Tuesday, but let's pretend it still is. First Tuesday of every month. We're supposed to live in a free market economy, and yet we've got these unelected bureaucrats deciding what the price of money is. That sounds more like price controls and communism to me. So this is what we want to do. And the machine is where we get a grassroots people movement that acts, and we need numbers. So August the 31st, there is a march against immigration around the country. According to media reports, there was somewhere around 200,000 people at March, give or take 10,000. We need 200,000 people, like you say, all coalescing into one party. We need them paying their $50 membership fee each year, 200,000 by $50, $10 million. Suddenly we're in the game, right? Because that's the other thing you need is coin. Because, driving into the city, parking your car, buying a bottle of water, probably costs you $50. Don't shout out the clouds about it in the Sunday afternoon in the middle of the CBD when no one's listening. We need to get out and actually deliver 50 flyers each, those 200,000 people, and get 10 million flyers into 10 million household mailboxes of 10 million households. And those flyers, and this is what we're going to do, our 5 key policies: lift a tax-free threshold of 45 grand. Basically, we don't think anyone should pay tax below the cost of living. It's absurd. We want people to keep their superannuation. Median salary in this country is a bit over $80,000. If you earn 80 grand, you pay just under 20 grand tax. You need 50 grand to live on. That last 10,000 you've got left to save, guess where that goes? Superannuation, right? So it's not really 12% of it might be 12% of your gross income, but it's 100% of your total income if you earn a median salary, right? And of course, superannuation proponents will go, oh yeah, but they're getting 6 or 7% on their super return. So what? If a house costs $1 million and you can't put your money in, save up for a deposit for your house, and the house is grown by 6 or 7%, well, the opportunity cost of not owning a house is 60 or 70 grand a year versus the piddly little 3 grand you're getting in income in your super, right? So let's empower the individual.
Isn't money supply grown by like 8?
Yeah, that's another issue, but that's yet again, I'll come on to that one later on. And then same for childcare. Let's get rid of there's millions of shift workers in this country that can't access institutionalised childcare. They can't even get the funds. But, we've got nurses, policemen, hospitality workers down here on the Gold Coast. How many people are working out in the pubs, running hotels? We've got truck drivers. So yet again, all these entrenched systems that are taking taxpayers' money, clipping the ticket. I mean, it's like Albanese is talking about giving another $150 energy rebate, right? And it sounds like, oh, we're going to get that. You're not going to see that. That goes straight through to AGL, owned by Mike, or partly owned by Mike Cannon Brooks. okay, to keep pumping money into renewables, right? So this is the machine we want to build, these grifters and these people that won't be honest and all of those sort of things. And we want to be able to actually get but to do that, we need a very active grassroots movement to do that, because number one, we need them to sell the message because we don't have access to mainstream media. And it will also help, raise the money in an honest way, like $50 each, not, it's $1 a week. And rather than relying on one or two big donors like Gina Reinhardt or whatever. And so we can then, build a machine to beat machine.
It's funny because, like, if you spread the breadcrumbs and you can track your way back, you can then see what's happening, right? But the problem is people aren't doing that. They're just trusting the system. They're just like, most people don't even know what money their superannuation is in. Most people don't even look at their superannuation reports every year, right? There's that much superannuation that's lost in the system that belongs to people, and they don't even realize it. And it's because I just think that, everyone has just been indoctrinated, like you said, to the machine. And then you got someone like yourself trying to build this new machine to overpower, this machine that's been the same for so long. We had one of the top demographers, if not the top demographer in the country. We haven't released his pod yet on the podcast. And he said, I forget the year, I don't know if it was 10 years, 15 years, or 20. Well, it was within that range. He says that it will be a minority in government. His belief based on data. It won't be Labor and it won't be Liberal. It'll be someone else in power. But it's interesting, right? Because he's a demographer. Like what you said of Liberal is the average age, right, of membership is 72. That means 50% of them are older than 72. Well, let me tell you, those people are going to be dying off very soon. And you have this new generation that are coming through, in my opinion, that are quite lost, right, in the whole economic side of in this country, because they feel like they've got the shit end of the stick, right? That the boomers had it, right? The boomers have it made. And these, in my opinion, if I'm in your shoes, right, I could be wrong, I'm not a politician, but these are the ones that I would really be concentrating on, because they need to be led.
I would, with, again, not trying to sound overly simplistic, but it's like, perhaps for what you're saying, or for what the demographer is saying to actually occur, and for a minor party to get in, that the focus needs not be on policy, but it needs to be on marketing, right? Like you had Mandami just won in New York, the mayoral election in New York, running on a tax the rich slogan, which he won't be able to, he won't have the power to bring to fruition all the things that he's promised, right? Because he'll get blocked. He'll get blocked through Albany, and he'll get blocked through the federal government. But you've got a disenchanted youth. You've got the rise of social media and the rise of the attention economy. Should the focus perhaps be to recruit some like, you don't just want to recruit an influencer for the sake of recruiting an influencer, but finding someone who has a large following within the country. Let's just throw out names, right? Like someone like Beck Judd, or someone who has a following that is interested in politics, to speak the message, or to talk the marketing slogan, in a sense. Is that what these minor parties need to start to get a following and start to build?
Okay, so we need two things, right? Yes, we do need the marketing.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously need the policies, but if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it?
Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I'd argue One Nation's getting a lot of press at the moment, but they're getting press about being One Nation and how they're going in the polls. They're not getting press about their policies. They're getting press because Pauline's in the States, or Pauline's doing this. But that's not, so that's the sales pitch. So I agree with you in terms of the politics. Like, we'll take any influencers. Obviously, they need to be sort of aligned with us ideologically. Of course, we'll take any promotion we can get, but there is still no substitute for good policy. And Madame, how do you pronounce his name? Is it Mandami? Yeah. His solution to taxing the rich is a tearing down approach, right? We're different people first, because we want to build rebuild this country. Okay, and what we want to do, and we don't just have the solutions and the know-how, because my background in tax and finance, but we also have the vision. And the vision is this: is that we're going to rebuild our infrastructure, just like Lachlan Macquarie built our infrastructure, just like John Monash built our infrastructure, just like Leo Hilscher built our infrastructure. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about these wonderful Australians who helped build this country. And we're going to give this vision, and we're also going to give him inspiration. So a lot of people turn to One Nation out of desperation. And as we say, turn to people first, because we'll give you inspiration.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. Yeah. The policies that we've got, in particular our infrastructure bank and controlling our own currency, which is actually equity. So one of the biggest myths ever peddled to us. So, as we all know, our younger generation today has been brainwashed by the idea that CO2 is bad for the environment. Right. We were brainwashed, and people of our ilk, or take some of you guys born around in the 70s, that you can't print money out of thin air. Right. That's an oxymoronic statement. You are brainwashed into thinking government should not control the volume of credit in the system. And it's the complete opposite. The government should control the volume of credit in the system, because credit is our currency. That currency is backed by the Australian people, right, and all the wealth in this country. So the issue needs to be, and this is, if I take away one thing today, and I know you've got a lot of business people who watch this show, there is one other form. There's two types of credit capital, right? You've got debt and you've got equity, right? What is debt? And you've got, obviously on the other side of the balance sheet, you've got an asset. If I say I've got a tractor and you're an auditor, what are you going to look for?
What
You're
are
going to
you
look for a
worrying
tractor. You're going to go out to the farm and you're going to look for a tractor, and you're going to look for an invoice that says the farmer, you bought a tractor. If you've got debt, what are you going to look for? What's the physical instrument behind debt?
The asset.
No. Physical instrument that says you've got debt. It's a legal instrument.
Like the loan.
It's a mortgage.
The loan document.
Yeah, it's actually a legal document. Right. Now, what's the legal instrument behind equity?
Shares.
Share statement.
Shares, but what is shares? What is it? You have what?
A piece of a company.
The pink slip.
You have title.
Yep.
Okay. What's Australia? It's a sovereign country. What does it mean? We have title.
We have title in the country.
Over all of our wealth in this country, step one. But step two, something even more important, we have title over all the untapped wealth in this country. And the untapped wealth is every time it rains, every time the sun shines, every time you drop a bull in a paddock with 20 cows and you come back next year, you get 20 calves, that wealth is coming out of the sky, right, for free, right? Mother Nature creates wealth all the time. But what we've done when we privatised our dams and we privatised our power stations and we sold our ports, we have now given the benefits of that all. We've gone and borrowed heaps of foreign debt, like after 1985 and Paul Keating dropped capital controls.
Yeah.
We went and brought in all this foreign debt. We now pay so much interest offshore just to use our own currency. So yeah, we don't our central bank, apart from COVID where they printed $300 billion to pay people to stay at home and get brainwashed by the premiers, we don't print money in this country. We do something even dumber. We go and borrow printed money and then pay other countries interest on their currency that we've switched into ours to use our own currency.
How do you fix that, though?
Well, we need to re-educate people. So the answer is this. It's not a question of whether or not you print money out of thin air. It's whether you secure it against an asset or not. So BHP, if I said to you, BHP have just announced the share raising to build a new coal mine, no one would go, oh, BHP can't issue new shares out of thin air, would they? Right? Well, why can't the government issue infrastructure bonds, the federal government through an infrastructure bank, back to the state governments to build dams, power stations, tunnels, railway lines, ports and airports? Because this is what we've got to do. We've got to rebuild, right, our country.
But is that a good investment to invest in those bonds in a world where there is more and more debt being raised? I mean,
but here's the thing: from a consolidated point of view, it's not debt; it's equity, because we have equity over our own untapped wealth. So if we build a dam today for $1 billion, we will go offshore and we will borrow $1 billion offshore. Means the first $1 billion in wealth we create, we've got to repay offshore. Plus, let's say it took 25 years to pay it off at 4%. That's another 100% in interest. We've just paid $2 billion offshore to build a dam that we already owned.
So is what you're saying? Since 1971, the US has basically raised debt to financialize Wall Street instead of raising debt to build infrastructure.
Absolutely.
What you're saying is we need to raise debt, not to give stimmy checks and to financialize the ASX or the companies within the ASX. We need to build infrastructure that we know
Tangible things.
that Australia
Exactly.
owns.
Yeah.
That can get a return.
Only certain sovereign assets, right? So the ones I just listed.
We've given away a lot of the other ones
Yeah,
already.
dams, power stations, toll roads or tunnels, railway lines, ports, airports, and telecommunications, right? They're our sovereign assets that generate income. So you put over here, you've got the infrastructure bank. Now, the beauty of doing that is what that means is instead of paying interest overshore, you're paying dividends back to the infrastructure bank. Yep. And then that comes back to the federal government. So we're keeping the wealth that we create here in Australia.
So can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think we could argue whether it's better that the private sector builds or the government builds.
Different question.
But I think there's benefit in both. The building is the answer, right? We need to build productive assets.
Yes.
Right? Whoever builds them. Versus the amount of subsidies to go into property. Do you consider property to be a productive asset versus building into infrastructure? Because that seems to be the government's current playbook here, is to subsidise property through 5% and first home buyers grants.
Well, so this comes back to the capital controls.
What's your thought on that?
So hang on. So I'll just go back to that using debt. We're not using debt. We're using equity. So as infrastructure bonds, sure, they're a debt to the state government, but they're an asset to the Australian people because we have shares in the infrastructure bank. Now, when you pay that interest back to the infrastructure bank and it makes money over here, and then we go back and we set up another Commonwealth bank. So for your listeners, most of your listeners probably know the Commonwealth Bank used to be owned by the Australian public. You have what you call a savings bank over here, and I'll touch on this savings bank in a minute. The profit from the savings bank. So the four major banks make about 35 billion, close to $40 billion. So we'll divide, instead of dividing 40 billion by 4, we'll divide 40 billion by 5. So we'll shave a couple of points off their return on equity. And what we'll do is we'll make about 6 to 8 billion over here. We'll set the infrastructure bank up to make 6 to 8 billion over here. And then we're going to create a bank in the middle called the Development Bank. And this was started by Robert Menzies in 59, to all you Liberals getting all antsy about me interfering with finance. And that will then relend money to the state governments on non-productive assets like schools and hospitals or the councils for sewage works. Right now, by doing this, what we're doing is we're taking out the cost of finance on our own currency, and we will save tens of billions of dollars because we effectively now pay private banks to borrow our own money. This is the government, right?
Is there a country at the moment that is doing something similar that you can point to, like analogous to this?
Well,
who operates this way?
Well, I mean, it's happened here in Australia twice. It happened first time by a bloke by the name of Lachlan Macquarie. So the first 17 years of the colony, the colony relied on foreign currency. There was a drought in 1805. There was no currency left, so they started bartering rum. That literally went tits up. So Lachlan Macquarie was the first governor to come in after that rum rebellion, and he issued the Holy Dollar. So that was the Spanish bloom, and he punched a hole in it. And with that Holy Dollar, he financed the construction of those sandstone buildings you see in Macquarie Street today, like Sydney Hospital, Sydney Barracks. And of course, who uses the Holy Dollar as its logo today, guys? Macquarie Bank.
Right.
And what was their business model? How'd they get off the ground? They were the middleman in all the privatisation of our infrastructure in the early 1990s.
So just Mark asked a question. I'm not too sure where you're coming to it or not, but it's great. The policies all are sound by the sound of it, and have worked twice before. So it sounds like a marketing problem, not a policy problem. And so with that, it's like, how do you get to access the younger people, the disenchanted people, to then want to swing towards people first? So again, back to that question is how do you get that to the people in a consumable format that they're going to understand, where it just doesn't, they get eyes glazed over and it's like, fuck politics again.
Yeah. Okay. So the reforming the taxation and monetary system to put Australia first, that's the slogan of our last policy, right? It's the first three policies that we're going to sell to the people: lifting the tax-free threshold to $45,000. That's $4,000 back in your pocket. Childcare directly to the parents, and keeping your superannuation, right? Or allowing you can still put money in a super. We're still allow up the first 25 grand in income in super to be tax-free, but it's the money in your pocket, those first three policies, that are the sales pitch.
They're good policies, especially when 40% of your super is invested in debt that's probably going to get smashed on a real basis.
Well, it's been invested. $1 trillion is going to get sent to the US to be invested by the US, so they'll clip 1% on that, and that's $10 billion in management fees going to the US. That'll pay for the $8 billion in critical minerals. They've still screwed us on that deal. Don't start me. But on the reforming, what the message that, as I say to my members when I'm doing the stump speech, just what I want people to take away is that we have the knowledge to reform the structural imbalances in this country, in our economy, to actually get us building infrastructure and actually putting something back in the cupboard for our children.
I want people to listen very carefully at what Gerard just said over the last 5 minutes or so, because when he said earlier, I'm building a machine, right, to beat the machine, you're explaining the machine, right, in the last 5 minutes, excluding policies and stuff. But that's the business model of how you're going to get us out of the shit, basically, right, is what you're explaining there. So I want people to have a real listen to that, because that's a bit of a business lesson there in regards to how the economy would work for raising that kind of capital, right, to get us out of the shit. So because it's easy for us to sit here and go, and then just go over someone's head. So I just want to make sure that you listen to that. I want to talk about some other topics, and I want to go back to policies as well. What's your honest assessment right now, last 7 months since Labor's been in government? What's your assessment of what they've done?
Well, they don't have a big picture vision. They're continuing to double down on renewables. It's a real shame. They're continuing to double down on the lack of transparency. We've seen that just recently with the freedom of information laws. They can basically continuing to push these same elements they pushed, which is the, I hate using this word, the global narrative, but they're effectively they're not dealing with the underlying problems in the economy, which is about empowering the individual and the families. It's all like social media under 16 laws, right? Yet again, it's a genuine issue, kids being on social media too much. I would have said kids being on gaming is more of an issue, for what it's worth. At least on social media, you're interacting, outside of just the gaming itself. But yet again, their solution is that the government can fix it, not the individual, right? So this is a real concern. So nothing's changed under Albanese. Their vision is not the vision that we want for this country. They want a bigger government. We want a smaller government. We want to empower the individual and the families. They want to empower government, their mates in superannuation. And yet again, this. We're now going. We've got so much money in super. We're now going to invest overseas. Like that's just absurd. Yet again, with the critical minerals deal, okay, well, I get that US is an ally, so we probably should have a deal with them over critical minerals. But where's the vision to actually add value to our own critical minerals? That $8 billion worth of critical minerals we sell as raw materials will probably be turned into $800 billion worth of finished product. Because it'll go into phones and high tech products that'll be the value will be added offshore. Why can't we?
Can we use it all? Could we use it all? Like I know that we could use much more energy than we need to bring the cost of energy down, and we're selling so much of that at cheap rates overseas. But can we use all those critical minerals? Because do we have the productive capacity here? Are we producing enough?
Well, we can have the productive capacity.
Should have.
By step one, building more power stations. And this is the other thing, just back to that monetary policy. If you build more power stations, build more dams, you'll increase supply. So a lot of people think by issuing credit, you're going to cause inflation. Yes, if you print and spend, debit expense, you will create inflation. But if you print and build and increase supply instead of demand, you'll actually drive down the cost of goods. So more dams, more power stations, you'll drive down the cost of energy. Better roads,
We're doing the total opposite though at the moment, eh? Like we're not building enough of anything, and the demand is increasing, and that's putting so much pressure on inflation. Like it's
exactly.
It's so basic when you actually look at that from an accounting perspective.
Yeah, even the US is talking a big game about restructuring, reshoring, and rebuilding, and PMIs are still under 50. They're still in negative.
Yeah,
like is it actually happening quick enough? I don't.
Well, it's not happening quick enough. And it won't under Albanese, I can tell you that. No. It won't happen under the Liberals, I can tell you that for a fact, because I was the Secretary of the Finance Backbench Committee for 5 years, and I used to just come in with policy all the time. They just weren't interested.
Do we have to suffer a little bit of short-term inflation though to achieve those goals?
Well, we're suffering. We have been for the last few years, but you can suffer all you like unless you get people out there that can see the solution, have the know-how to implement the solution, and then provide the optimism through providing a vision. People can suffer all they like. The problem at the moment is is that there's no politicians out there, I'd argue that people first are the exception, providing solutions and a vision. And we know, and it's nothing, what we're doing is nothing new. It's all been done before by Macquarie, by Monash, by, guys like Leo Hilscher, what's his name, King O'Malley, who started the CBA. If we go back and understand our history, we can just have to look back at our own history to know where the solution lies, which is in building infrastructure, especially, more power, cheap, reliable power. And this is how we get back to the critical minerals question. Build more power stations, drive down the cost of energy, abolish payroll tax by bringing back stamp duty on share trading. 50 to 60% of the shares traded here in this country are traded by foreigners. Why don't they pay stamp duty? There's just been a ruling this week whereby a judge has ruled that the sale of infrastructure is not a real asset. So foreigners are now selling assets in this country, not paying capital gains tax. So we can lower the taxes, we can lower energy prices. We can, and especially the payroll tax. It is absurd that if you're basically paying more than $1 million in wages, you got to pay payroll tax. That has got to go.
What's the incentive, right?
Yeah.
What's the incentive of hiring more people?
Yeah.
Like people are trying to hire overseas contractors and different types of things just to be under the threshold, rather than going and investing back into your people.
And I'd pull it chiefly. I mean, I'm talking a little bit, highfalutin here, I'll admit. But if I was Prime Minister, I'd pull it chiefly and do a 51(6) of the Constitution, right, where it says we're in charge of defence powers. That's how we built the Snowy Hydro, because as you know, the states are responsible for building for water and building dams. So after World War II, they needed to find gainful employment for all these immigrants. So they decided, chiefly being the visionary that he was, and he was also the author of the 1937 Banking Royal Commission that said central banks should control the volume of credit in the system. He knew that we needed to build dams to give the immigrants to work and keep them being productive. So the states initially objected to what chiefly was going to do with the Snowy Hydro. So he just said, well, I'm going to pull out a 51(6) of the Constitution. That says that the federal government's responsible for defence. And he said, well, we need this for defence purposes. We need this dam for defence purposes. So if we get in and I get any pushback from the states, I'm just going 51(6), mate. You want to get in the road of progress in this country. If you want to stop infrastructure from being built, we'll bring in the military. And that's actually one of our policies, is to bring back the military apprenticeship scheme and then actually build a military engineering corps, both a civil engineering corps to build roads and dams and electrical mechanical engineering corps to build power stations and build factories, because we're going to have to go back and get the military to do it. And by having that military engineering corps, that will actually provide a platform for apprentices. We'll give them, they'll have a place to sleep, free food and accommodation. So it helps apprentices, pay for the work.
I love the whole infrastructure side, but it makes sense. And then you have stuff like, I don't know if it's stage 3 or stage 4 of the light rail here on the Gold Coast that just got denied by state government. Which in my opinion, the one from Southport now to I think it's Broadbeach, has supposedly the numbers are better than was ever expected. And then obviously they went now to Burley. And now they just said, okay, yeah, no, we're not going to the airport. And this is, in my opinion, like you said, the infrastructure that we need to spend on that they're not. And it's just like, no, we're not spending on that. And then you hear stuff like, okay, we're going to spend X amount of millions of dollars on these, machete bins and these all this rubbish stuff that, like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense to the everyday person, right? We're everyday people. It doesn't make sense to any of us. But what happens is we're so busy in our lives, I feel, that you see it, you read it and go, oh my God, that is absurd. What are we having for dinner? Are you picking up the kids? Yeah, okay. And then life goes on.
Yeah.
Right. So there's all this stuff that's happening in the background, but we're like a horse with blinders, so busy in our everyday lives trying to make ends meet that we don't even have, the foresight to actually listen to someone like Gerard Rennick on a podcast or go, hey, what's this piece of paper that I just got in the mail that you and 200,000 other people dropped off?
Yeah.
What's it? Straight in the rubbish, straight back onto Instagram. And I think this is one of the major issues. People just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And this is where what James is going to earlier is going, understand the policies. I understand all that. Sounds great, but how do you get heard? How do you break through the noise, right? And like what we've been doing with Unemployable is 2 years ago, we've been doing long form content, right? We just didn't know what we were doing. We started a podcast and here we go. And then slowly you break through the noise and slowly you start building a community and slowly you start building credibility. So like what I want to know, back to Mark and James's where they were going with those questions, is how the hell are you going to break through in your lifetime without you going bananas and your wife saying, you know what, Jared, screw you. You're leaving me on weekends. This is too much. I wanted to go to the Bahamas, you know. What is it going to actually take? Because I think people like yourself need to maybe think a little bit differently in regards to how you are marketing, right? Like, because you look at these things that go viral, like my kids, they're telling me about these Labubu's and this and that. And, you know, we went to Dubai and we got to go to this restaurant, Raising Cane's. And I'm like, what is that? I never heard of that. Oh, it's, you know, we've heard it on TikTok and we've heard it and there's so much influence and millions of people doing the same thing. I almost feel like it needs to be a different approach, because let me tell you, Pauline Hanson ain't going to do it. Clive Palmer ain't going to do it. You know, Albanese and, you know, the Liberal Party, which I want to talk about in a sec. They're not doing any of that stuff. You know who did that and who did it very well?
Yeah, tails in the green.
Right. Well, in my opinion, Donald Trump did it really well in the last election, right? He took over Facebook, right? And in my opinion, right, and they went bananas on pods, like Barron, his dad. I think I remember him saying, going in an interview, saying, if it wasn't for my son going on the pod, telling me to go on the pods. What are your thoughts, Mark?
I was going to say Donald Trump is a once in a lifetime, once in a generational marketing savant talent, and his ability to basically take everything that was thrown at him and transmute that into positive energy for him and his base is a freak show, right? And I'm sure we can all learn from Trump. But I think you are right in what you said about the Greens. Like, given of all the political parties with the least amount of substance and the most amount of wrong shit in terms of bad for our country, they have been able to get the most cut through, especially in Victoria, where I'm from.
But is that in the younger generation?
Well, they're able to rally the troops, right? It's like they're able to have this group of influencers and etc. just kind of stand up and kind of speak the policies of the party.
Who are you? Who is the demographic you're trying to? You know, you said you got 200,000 force for good. Who are you trying to? Who is the target demographic of people you're trying to sway?
Well, each and every Australian. I mean, ultimately,
I mean, obviously, it's not the 72-year-old Liberal.
Well, there's them too, right? Because they deserve to be looked after in retirement.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone, you know, it's the dignity and worth of every individual. I mean, this is yet again why I talk about empowering the individual and the families. I'm not targeting anyone. If they're prepared to get out of bed, as I said, I'm targeting those Australians who want to stand up for themselves. And if they get out of bed every day and put their nose to the grindstone, i.e. wealth for toil, and they're the true capitalists, remember. So I'm not a free marketeer because I've never been to a market that's free. There's only two outcomes in a market. You're either making money or losing money. That's how you define markets. But I do believe in people who risk their own capital, and that's not necessarily just financial capital. If you're a tradie or a labourer and you're using your hands every day, that's your human capital. If you're an 18-year-old tradie, all you've got is your hands and your ability and your willingness to learn, that's human capital. That's capital. If you're a nurse or a teacher putting your heart on the line, teaching children, looking after the elderly, you know that's your capital. If you're a scientist or engineer using your intellectual property, that's capital. Yeah. Anyone that's out there having a go is who I want to stand up for. I'm not judging people on their demographic or anything like that. Yeah. It's what's in here that counts.
I one sec, Mark. I just look at it and go, and then again, I'm not an expert at this at all, but I'm just trying to think, in basics. I feel that, like, you look at this new generation, right? And I don't even know, anyway, between the ages of, voting age to, say, 30 years old, as an example. Me growing up, Mark growing up, James growing up, there was no social media, right? The only influence I had would be like Hulk Hogan, as an example, right? Like that's kind of the influence, because there was nothing else. You're watching TV, right? There was nothing else. There was no TikTok, there was no Instagram, anything like that. And the other influence you had was from family, from your parents. But I think what's happening is, there is a gap happening, that there is less people of the younger generation now being influenced by their parents and their decisions and what they've done.
Absolutely.
Than ever before. and they're not being influenced by, hey, dad, you voted liberal, so I'm going to vote liberal now. They're being influenced by the person on the other end of this phone, right? Like a Mr. Beast or an influencer, whoever they're going, hey, vote for the Greens or this or that, and going, you know what? I'm not going to do what you did, dad, because I trust this person more, because you know what? I spend a lot more time with this person than I spend with you, dad, because I see this person every day, multiple times a day. And I think that's where, like, when I hear this demographer saying, in his opinion, from his demographic research, that there will be a minority party in government in future, the person or the group that will win, in my opinion, is one that can break through the noise somehow.
But that's maybe that's part of the issue, right? Like with the Greens are all about the environment, and everything that we do comes back to it's going to be better for the environment. And people kind of get beyond that, get behind that. Maybe part of the issue is that when we're speaking about large scale government policy about rebuilding roads and energy infrastructure and things like that, the average person sits at home and goes, well, yeah, but I get that that's going to be good for the country, but what about me, right? Like Donald Trump had an ability to speak to the taxi driver, to speak to the restaurateur, to speak to people and say, this is how you are going to benefit. We often, when we do our Friday pod without a guest and we just riff, we talk often about how we don't think that property is going to be the buy and hold investment it was from 1980 to 2020, when interest rates went from 16% down to zero, because it had that tailwind. And we talk all the time about how the individual, the sovereign individual at home that is trying to fight this quagmire and this mess, this battle that's going on, is better off just buying gold and Bitcoin. Because, and I know you have some views on Bitcoin, and maybe we can go there if you like, because that's the best thing that they can do. Even better than going to a march where everything they say is kind of going to get distorted from the mainstream media press. What they can do is they can buy gold, they can buy Bitcoin, and they can keep working their job. And then that can, as everything unfolds, inflation, debasement, all that happens, at least they're building a nest egg. Where is the policy message that talks directly to the individual? I think maybe that's what's missing from the minor parties. It's like rallying the individual based on the back of something that has virality, and that can actually benefit the individual, the sovereign individual. Like, I don't know, maybe.
Well, look, I completely disagree with you on the buying gold and Bitcoin in the first instance. By all means, you can buy that. I would always say to anyone, own your own house. It is the nest. Okay, if you've got a roof over your head and you can own that, I know that's hard and this is why I'm focused on fixing capital controls and cutting taxes and all that to put more money in and making super voluntary, because we've got to get our children owning their own home. Because while they're sitting in those shitty dog boxes and in the inner city CBD, and then occasionally going out on the weekend and looking at these multi-million-dollar houses, that is driving them away from feeling, a part of this country. They're resenting their
I believe that. I believe that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
And that's different to our generation. I'm so grateful, the sacrifices of our forefathers have made for us, but we have squandered it in this generation. Maybe not Gen X baby boomers, have squandered it in the sense that we have given our children, left them with no hope. So we have, but I'm telling, as someone that didn't get married till I was 37 and, had 7 years overseas, went to heaps of countries, buying a house, settling down and having kids was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's just refocused my direction. And, like I've always, had, been a bit of a weekend warrior and had lots of, fun and all that stuff. But, I know now it's time to give back. It's time to give back to my country and.
But I agree with you, right? I think there's huge benefit in being able to buy your own home. But as you kind of alluded to, the reality is that majority of Australians have been priced out of owning their own home.
Yeah.
Now, if that Australian could go back 10 years and instead of putting 5%, 20% of their paycheck aside in the hopes to be able to save a deposit to buy a home that then inflated at a pace faster than what they could save the deposit to keep up.
Yeah.
If they had to put that money into gold or Bitcoin, they would have had a much larger deposit and ability to buy a home. So in the face of the fact that homes are becoming more and more affordable, and if you'll admit that that's not a problem that you could fix overnight, there needs to be a stepgap measure between now and then for them to not lose purchasing power. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean, and look, so Bitcoin's a different type of product, but gold has only taken off in the last few years. So there for a long time, from about 2013 to 2020, it went sideways.
Yeah, but that is
on the gold bug. So I mean, but yet again, in terms of quality of life, and this stuff's priceless. Having a roof over your head for your children, having your children in a stable household where they're not getting kicked out of their rental property every 12 months or 2 years, having to move school, the stress and all of that stuff, I would still argue, because one of these days, gold won't keep, well, who knows? I don't want to predict. I don't like predicting the future, but just having a house at some point, and it doesn't have to be when you're 21, but at some point, it's just what it gives you in terms of your inner contentment. It's not just financial. It's also, I don't want to, spiritual, if you want to use that word, but that inner contentment and having a happy family. There's no substitute than having, being in a house that you call home.
Is that perhaps then why, if I could take the other side, why Labor has been so successful? Because through all their faults, they have been held, whether we agree with the policies from an entrepreneurial point of view or not, they have been hell bent on getting people into homes through first home buyer grants and low deposits.
Well, that's the best bit of brainwashing. Labor were actually the biggest reason why you don't own a home, because Keating lifted capital controls in 85. John Button, who's a Victorian Labor senator, abolished tariffs in 1985 that destroyed Victoria and the manufacturing industry. John Dawkins in 1990, the Labor education minister, basically said to our young generation, we'll lend you money to go to university to get a degree so you can graduate when you're 22, broken, brainwashed. And then Keating again in 1992 came along and said, by the way, we're going to take 12% of your money. He didn't say it in 1992. He started off at 2%. But had he said in 1992, by 2025, we're going to take 12% of your income, give it to someone you've never met, and there's no guarantee you're going to get back with 67, people wouldn't have voted for that. New Zealand actually had a vote on compulsory superannuation. They voted against it 92% to 8. So the idea that Labor, you might be right on the perception, but the truth of the matter, but Howard was the same for baby bonus, the first home buyers grant. That was first home buyers grant was actually the retiree sellers grant, because all that did was prop up house prices by 35,000 if you assume a 20% deposit. So yet again, and it's been, I've been sticking in Hawke and Keating, but the Howard Costello years were pretty stupid, pretty irresponsible as well.
So what, just on that, on housing, and then you got the 5% deposits, no LMI, etc. What's your view on that? The good, the bad, and the ugly. How's it going to unfold?
Well, there's no good. It's bad and it's ugly. It's a classic example of how they've basically inflated credit. So, i.e., getting credit capital, similar terms here. To give a false economy. And here's the thing. If they had, and this is where Keating went wrong in 1985. So one of the impacts of when Keating lifted capital controls in 1985, the amount of debt held by private banks exploded from $8 billion in 1985 through to $800 billion by 2008. That sent house prices from 4 times average earnings to 10 to 12 times average earnings, sent 2 parents back to work, hence the creation of the childcare industry, drove the birth rate down to 1.5, hence the demand for immigration. And then in 2008, backed on the back of 15 years of, superannuation and the creation of the financial management industry. And some of these, I knew someone who basically was a gym instructor, did a week's financial planners course on the Gold Coast, and was suddenly advising people how to invest their money. A lot of people, retirees, lost their money in 2008. Then they borrowed against their investments, lost the investments, had to sell their house to pay off the investment. So Kevin Rudd allowed students to buy housing in this country, hence the creation of the foreign student sector, right? But one of the aspects of this was, in the old days before capital controls was abolished. So when I worked at the Bank of Queensland as a Treasury accountant, for every $1 million we lent out, 60% of it was from wholesale foreign funding. Right, so only 400,000 came from savings of fellow Australians. Right, now if capital controls had stayed in place, the most someone could have paid for a house is $400,000, not $1 million, and that was a virtuous cycle. And this is coming back to that savings bank I was talking about before, CBA. What that meant was that the children like the younger generation could not pay more for a house than what the older generation had saved. So you had an inherent link between earnings of the prior generation and house prices of the next generation because you had your proper capital controls, right? So coming back to the 5% deposit, if it was 20%, if you had $50,000 in savings and the most you had to have a 20% deposit for your house, the most you could pay for a house is $250,000, right? At a 5% deposit, the most you can pay for a house is now $1 million. Now, what would you rather? Buy a house, have everyone, contain house prices to a reasonable level so that everyone can buy a house for 250 grand, or let house prices, and remember this $1 million that 950 grand they're going to borrow, a lot of that's coming from offshore because the banks here, like the prior generation, doesn't have the $950,000 to lend. So they have to then go and borrow, the private banks go and borrow this money offshore on the Eurobond market, which is US dollars outside, traded on the global capital markets, and then lend that back to the Australian people or our younger generation. So we're creating this false economy of we're inflating the price of houses, and it's not linked to earnings. As we know, and you do this yourself, James, and you buy a business, you look at the net present value, say the income return in the next 5 years. You won't go beyond 5 years, and that's the true value of an asset. The true value of an asset is based on a ratio of earnings. When they detach capital controls, it's no longer related to earnings. It's how much banks can borrow from offshore. So all we've done is loaded up our children with so much debt, or in many cases even Gen Xers, with so much debt that and their earnings now are just being paid to interest to banks that then go offshore. That the interest gets paid offshore. And just the last little piece, there is no tax on net interest. It gets paid offshore because, as usual, the Australian government, while they've got their foot on the neck of small business, give foreign multinationals a tax break on the interest we pay them.
This is a really important point, and I want to kind of try and surmise something and then re-click on it because I think this is really important. And a lot of Australians don't understand it. Before we spoke about the financialization of the US economy through Wall Street, from 71 onwards. This is akin to what's happened in Australia with property.
Absolutely.
In America, it was the financialization of the stock market and Wall Street. And then that became one of the largest generators of tax receipts. In Australia, through the construction of new homes and through the taxation on property, it has become one of the largest revenue sources for the Australian government.
Exactly.
So what you are saying is that we could have kept prices low, but the government would have lacked that revenue. So that is why it is essential to create the building that you were speaking about at the start, because it's assets that create productivity and revenue. So it's kind of like we've gone this far for property prices to stop going up, and we need to replace that revenue for the government.
Exactly.
In order for that to happen. Right. The reason that the government continues to increase the amount of credit in the system, because that's another misconception. People think the property price is going up because of immigration, and some suburbs on the margin, yes, it's going to have an influence, but it's going up because of the increase in credit.
Exactly. Yep. And that's why immigration is actually a symptom, not a cause.
Exactly.
And that's the difference between we and One Nation. One Nation blame everything on immigration. I blame it on poor capital controls from 1985.
So the core message or the core platform that you're running on or and whatnot is to replace the government's main revenue source being through property, etc. Taxes on property, which we're all paying for in our increased debt that we're paying. Our cost of capital goes up, and it's now a larger percentage share of our weekly income. It's to substitute that with other productive assets.
Absolutely.
Right. That is, I think we need to create that message in some sort of viral way in order for people to get behind their property prices not going up infinitely. Because at the moment, you say to someone, I can solve all these problems, I can get everyone into a home, but your property prices might have to come down a little bit. No one's
doing the solve.
What we'll do, we're going to increase income. And let's draw on Leo Hilscher. So he was the former treasurer, head of Queensland Treasury. So Queensland was broke in the late 50s and early 60s. He opened up the bone coal deposits in central Queensland. What that did was create royalty from the coal, freight charges from the trains, port charges from the ports, right? The coal ports, right? Port Abbott and these places. He then did it again. He did it up in Weipa with the bauxite, except he said to Comalco, which was the Commonwealth Aluminium Company at the time, he said, you can't export bauxite. You can only export aluminium or alumina. So what happened as a result of that? That great town called Gladstone, our manufacturing hub here in Queensland, was built or grew because, Gladstone's got a beautiful deep water port and basically they had to add value at Gladstone. Not only that, Kogan Creek Power Station, we use our own coal. Tarong Power Station, we use our own coal. We had the cheapest energy here in Queensland in 1988. George Harrison was buying, tourist destinations. We had our tourism, under control. It's going really well. And that's the point. Like Lachlan Macquarie, Leo Hilscher understood. I went to see Leo when I first became a senator. He had to borrow that money. He couldn't issue his own credit, except he had to borrow it from offshore when we should have been issuing our own credit here in the form of shares. He borrowed it at 8% and he repaid it in 10 years. So they generated 100%. Profit in 10 years. And that's the stuff. This is where we got to start tapping that that wealth.
And then property prices can rise with productivity and wages rather than through the increase of credit.
Yeah, and more importantly, what we need to do, we don't want house prices to come down because people, they've got mortgages, but we want to lift wages. We want wages growing faster on the back of productivity than house prices.
Then it shrinks, and it shrinks the gap, which is the problem at the moment.
Yeah, and that's good, and that's what you stand for, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah,
clearly get another 4-year run up. So immediately, if you can spell it out in layman terms, with this 5% lure for people are now falling over themselves to get in a property, lay out the next 4 or 5 short to medium term. What's going to be the ramifications or the repercussions because of this false economy?
Well, the ramifications will be it'll take people longer to pay off their houses. So we've already seen that. So in 1992, about 10% of people retired with a mortgage. Today, I'll say today, this is a few years old, these figures, 40% of people are retiring with a mortgage. And this is the false economy of superannuation, of course, because people then just take out their super as a lump sum, pay off their mortgage, and then go on the pension anyway. So the banks have had it great both ways. They're clipping the financial engineers are clipping the ticket on the superannuation money, and the banks are clipping the ticket on the housing loans, right? And this is the thing. If we want to change our country around, we need to bring back out we need more civil engineers, mechanical engineers, and less financial engineers, even though I'm one of them. I grew up on the farm and I understand where wealth truly comes from, and it's not from grifting and clipping the ticket. But I want to use my knowledge and talk about equity and coming back to this effectively housing, if you're doing it, on the back of wages. And this is the other thing in 1985 when Button got rid of the tariffs. We decreased our asset base because a lot of the manufacturing industry went offshore. And then the other thing that happened in the late 80s in Victoria, I don't know if you've heard about the collapse of the Victorian State Bank. So when they lifted capital controls, it basically, most state banks were traditional savings banks. You just took people's savings and you lended it out against housing. The Victorian State Bank bought Tricontinental, which was an investment bank, and then that went broke with the Bonds and the Scases of the world, and then dragged the Victorian State Bank down with it. It nearly collapsed the Victorian government, or did collapse the economy in Victoria. They then had to start selling infrastructure to actually pay off the collapse of along with Pyramid Building Society. So this is where we created all this debt. We've sold all our infrastructure. So from a balance sheet perspective, we've done everything wrong. We've built up the debt levels and sold our productive assets to actually pay, to try and fund this debt that we've allowed to be created in the first place.
Could you argue that demographics will take their course, and as less and less Australians own property, the more likely they are to push for this kind of regime change? And you could also argue that capital controls are coming to a Western country near you fast, because that's now the only choice for these countries to get out of the situation that we're in.
Well, demographically, if there was no immigration, and this is why Treasury keep pumping immigration, right, is because they know, and they've got to do it for superannuation.
That kicks the can down the road.
Yeah, it kicks the can down the road. And it's also kicking the can down the road for superannuation because
all the baby boomers that are retiring.
Take our generation where, like I started work in 91, so I started paying into super in 92. When we retire at, say, 2035, 2040 at 65, 70, we'll be pulling out 40 years of superannuation in one hit. That means you need, or when we pass away, right? That means you need 40 people coming in behind you, putting in 1 year's of superannuation to make up for the outgoings. You'll need 40 people putting in 1 year's of contributions to make up for the outgoings. So, but around 2040, you're going to have this massive withdrawal of money from superannuation. So what's going to happen then? Knowing Labor, they'll try and lift it to 15, 16, 20% if they get their way. But so that's also a false economy.
Or they keep kicking the can down the road and you don't get it at a certain age, and next thing you know, it just keeps going up and up and up until maybe a point in time where you actually don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what's going on.
And again, you put on the rose-colored glasses, a bit of a fugazi. You got to dangle the carrot before you touch the carrot. You're already dead.
So US has kind of got a similar problem with their pensions, especially if they stop all the immigration. They've got a bunch of people that are going to be collecting pensions
with their defined benefits. That's right. Yeah.
So there's lots of pensions that won't be claimed, and that's already happening.
Yeah.
So if we, and I think there's a lot of merit to everything we've discussed today, but if we can't fix all these problems within the next 4 years or the next 8 years, what does the individual do between now and then? Like, is it
keep me out of it every day?
Is it buy gold? Like, do you know what I mean from a financial point of view?
Well, I hate giving financial advice, but I will say this to people who are doing it tough. Remember, 200 years ago, we had pioneering Australians come out of here. They were shipped over here as convicts. They were shipped over here. They were out in the scrub, living in some shanty. They had fires, floods, and droughts. Okay, we are living in a golden age. Okay, and even though it might seem hard, we are living so much better than most of people in humanity. Right, so don't give up. Whatever you do, don't wallow in self-pity. Don't get angry with the rest of the world. Just keep fighting. If a little no-ass like me could become a senator and get ahead, there's lots of people out there that can get ahead. Just keep going, because as Charles Darwin said, things don't change, they evolve. And it's that bit by bit, that incremental, Einstein said there's nothing so powerful as exponential interest, right? Just keep going, pay off your debt a little bit more. If you've got to skip a takeout one night, do it. If you've got to stay off the booze to do it, stay off the booze. But don't stop fighting.
I want to talk a little bit about, off camera, we're talking about Aussies leaving and a bit of a talent exodus. Recent reports show us a significant spike in Australians leaving the country for multiple reasons. I couldn't get any updated data only up till 2023, and I think since then there will be more and more of it. And we're probably in a little bubble because we know a lot of friends and acquaintances that have left. Is this something that you see as a problem, or is it just a little bit of a bubble that we're in, that we're seeing? And obviously when you're listening and hearing and seeing stuff on social media about it, you feel like it's everywhere, but it might just be within your echo chamber. Your echo chamber, 5 kilometer radius. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, it's always disappointing when anyone immigrates, especially if they're sort of successful at what they do and they're taking their talent with them. We don't want that to happen. I mean, I don't have the numbers on how many are immigrating, but it is disappointing if someone's grown up in Australia and they're Australian and they're leaving their country because they don't think there's the opportunities here anymore. I would call that a net loss. And I know a lot of it happened throughout COVID. I mean, a lot of people have just given up on Australia. They were so disgusted with the government throughout COVID that they said, we're not going to be here anymore. Especially in Victoria, where it was horrendous. The government overreach was out of control. So, but I would say this is indicative upon the government or indicative of governments today who basically have no vision for the future. And people that do like to look ahead and want to know where their country's going and where a better life for their children is, if the governments of today, if all they're doing is controlling people and not actually out there empowering people, not actually out there giving people hope, and to do that, you've got to have a vision, you've got to have a solution, and you've got to have the know-how, people give up. They go, well, why should I stay here when I've got, other countries, Trump's talking big, Texas, Florida. I know they're two big destinations. Dubai's giving, tax-free options. I mean, personally, I don't know why you'd go to Dubai, because what are they going to build? More skyscrapers in the middle of the desert? That's not for me. I mean, but some people might want to go there.
What they are doing, I've come from there, and that's what it looks like they're doing. And let me tell you, they're building hundreds of thousands of units, but they're doing what you're talking about, what you want to do. They're building infrastructure. They're spending a shit ton on infrastructure, making it easier for people to live, accessible. They're building the world's biggest airport with 400 gates at the moment.
Yeah, wow.
Right, they're using I've heard that they're using the old airport once that's done, just for private planes. Like they're building trains that will be connecting all the different Emirates together within like bullet trains, all these different types of things that you're like that will. Meanwhile, we're trying to build a tram line here for the last 4 to 5 years, and then saying no, you're not going to get the last part.
Victoria still doesn't have it.
Let's do a bus route. Let's do a bus route instead to take everybody there. So it's it's interesting. There's definitely I feel like Australia at the moment is not incentivizing the inventor, is not incentivizing the entrepreneur, is not incentivizing the builder. You're right. Like, why keep building when you've got this payroll tax and this tax, and then you've got fair work on your ass because you've said the wrong thing or you haven't ticked the right box. Like, it's a lot of pressure. Yeah. Right. There's a lot of anxiety for builders at the moment.
Topher said it best. The Australian government at the moment is trying to play God, and they're trying to like propagate a religion where we will take care of you and
and it's stifling, and that's why anyone a bit of get up and go, I can understand why. Well, I personally can't, because give me green grass and the outback, like give me. I love my country, and I love the Great Dividing Range. I love our beaches. I love mountain biking. I love all the outdoor stuff. Right? I mean, to me, I'd be like Dubai. Okay,
it's
good 5 days a week, but on the weekend, what am I going to do? Drive out to the desert and drive out in the desert and ride a camel? I mean, it's not me. And I bet you the surf in Dubai is it's hot, and I mean,
there's no surf. No.
Yeah, so
it's definitely not for everybody. Like you're probably, I mean, let's spit out facts. It's hard to beat the Australian lifestyle.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Like specifically, like Gold Coast for me. Like I mean, it is the best of the best when it comes to an actual lifestyle of where you would want to live.
We spoke about we were speaking about thought experiments yesterday on the podcast, and I thought of a question when I was dozing off to bed last night. If each one of us was reset to zero net wealth at our current ages, and we had to start again, which country would we decide to do it in?
Yeah,
right. Would you go to Dubai? I don't think so.
At the current ages?
Yeah, current age, right? You would stay in Australia, and you'd have a crack in Australia because it's the best country to it's still, I think, one of the best countries to.
Well, this is why we're all fighting for it, right? Like I know friends of mine.
Fantastic.
I know friends of mine that are overseas, and this isn't Adam specifically.
He's not a friend.
No, but I'm not pointing him out. I have other friends that are there, and it's for a stint. It's not forever. Yeah. They're not retiring there. Right. It's a stint. It's let me get it out of the system. There's a period of time where I can go and collect some big funds and then, bring it back at some point and, right off to the sunset. So I guess it all depends on, your situation. But that is a good thought experience.
This is
a very good question.
Australia. If you were starting from scratch, which the majority of Australians, unfortunately, the data says this is still one of the best countries in the world to make it from scratch. When you look at opportunity, lifestyle, and everything else, right?
If you could change one thing about how politics works in Australia, what would it be?
Policy or how? I mean, that's a broad question because there's a lot of things that need to change.
Even maybe the mechanism to communicate, mainstream media. What's the biggest bottleneck?
So given that it's in regards to politics, let's throw the way our system works in terms. There's a couple of things here and this is a good one to throw in, is should we have compulsory voting or not? Should people who don't really care about politics, I mean, they can have the vote if they want to vote, but if they don't want to vote, why do we make them vote? And that matters at the moment because I don't think
a lot of uneducated voters.
The way that
if the US had compulsory voting, it is quite likely Donald Trump would never have been elected.
Agree.
And here's the thing. Compulsory voting has served us very well in Australia. It's provided a great deal of stability. But unfortunately, that stability has turned into stagnation. We've now got two major parties that, in my view, are rotting dead carcasses. They are afraid of, putting themselves out there, suggesting, we haven't had any groundbreaking new policy probably since Howard brought in the GST. I can't remember the last political election where we actually had an election based around significant policy at all. So, and this is the thing. So we're now breeding these weak and insipid politicians because they're comfortable within the compulsory system. And, people first are up against this. We've got to get 4% of the vote to even get the money back. So if we do get to $1 million, say, by 2028, we've got to get 4% and we start from scratch again. So yet again, there's that problem in the system. The majors, they've now, because their primary votes dropped from, say, close to 50% down to the low 30s, they've now paying themselves $5 a vote, not $3.38. So they've given themselves a pay rise for their own incompetence. So I think I would like to see compulsory voting abolished. And I don't say that with glee because, I do think compulsory voting can serve us well, but our politics in this country is very stagnant. And I think that if you made it optional, you might get a shake up in the system a bit more because those people who are more active will be able to have greater influence rather than the people who are inactive.
What's the path to getting that approved?
That doesn't have to be, that's not stated in the Constitution. So I think that's just a question of changing the 1918, there's a word for it, Electoral Act. I'm pretty sure you don't need to have a vote. I'm pretty sure that's not constitutional compulsory voting. I doubt the majors would support it because they know that a lot of people go up, even though this is now rapidly changing. And so, mate, there was a time where people, because the majors got all the news attention, people just voted for either the leader of the opposition or leader of government, the prime minister, because that's all they ever heard about. With social media now, that's breaking it down and people are following, backbenchers and the like. I've still, even though I'm not in politics, probably still got a bigger social media profile politically than, I guess, 90% of politicians in Canberra. So that is breaking down.
Yeah, you got a few 100,000 followers on Facebook. I was actually quite surprised to see that amount.
Yeah.
Which is job well done.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily convert into votes, I should add.
No.
But but that one's worth, a lot of people talk, and same for compulsory preferential. So I still think you should have preferential, but should it be compulsory? There's two arguments to that one. You don't want a situation whereby if it wasn't compulsory and someone got 25, you had 10 parties running, and someone, and it started off 15, 14, 13, 12, so it added up to 100, but the highest ranked party was 15%. And let's assume no one gave preferences out. Under that extreme model, someone could govern the country with 15% of the vote if you had 10 parties running, right? So that's the downside of not having preferential. You want to say, well, if I can't get my first pick up, I want the second pick, right? But on the other hand, it also entrenches with people not understanding the preference. So if we had the old system of Senate voting where you had the group voting ticket prior to 2016, which used to be the Senate, the process in the Senate, I'd be the senator, not Malcolm, because I had the preferences from Palmer's fourth preference. I was above One Nation there, Family First, Libertarians, and Citizens Electoral Party. So yet again, that little tinkering of the Electoral Act in 2016 was the difference between myself and Malcolm getting up in the last election. Not many people would have realised that. And interestingly enough, even though I was Family First number 2 preference, 30% of their votes went to the Greens and the Cannabis Party. You know what I mean? So that's the downside to preferential voting, is that preferences just get sprayed everywhere.
Is there any way that the Australian citizens can call for a change like compulsory voting? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Join a political party and get actively involved. There's no easy
hard work.
It's hard work. All I can say is the world is run by those who turn up.
Yeah.
So, if you're not involved in a political party, if you're not happy with the political system, but you're not involved in a political party, don't complain when things aren't going your way. And this is what I've been saying to our followers, because I'll do a survey when I do my branch meetings. I go, how many people have been in a political party before? And you might get 1 in 10, and they're usually disgruntled LNP, but we do have Labor and Greens people in our party. And I'll say, how many people have actually been in a volunteer organisation, like a school PNC, sporting organisation, where you've turned up and run your locals? Not many. And I say to them, well,
I don't think I've ever have, to be honest with you.
There you go. So don't complain. Because the world is run by those who turn up, and if you're not turning up to these things, getting and you don't have to make a contribution through politics. You can make a contribution.
Actually, we are. We're volunteering on the podcast.
Oh, well, no, you are. No. That's a volunteering effort. And it's not necessarily always you have to change the world through politics. You can do it through your education system, getting involved with school P&F, the sporting, system, or there's people that work at St. Vincent's de Paul for free. My aunt, who recently passed away, she used to volunteer, well into her 80s, to go and work at St. Vincent de Paul a couple of days a week. Everyone who makes a volunteer, all our volunteers who are out there helping, whether you're Lions or Rotary, that's what makes for a better community. And that's probably one of the biggest disadvantages of this iPhone and in-house entertainment today, whether it's Netflix. 50 years ago, people would leave their house because they were literally bored. There was nothing to do. Now you can pick up the phone and get someone to bring you an ice cream.
There's only so many dandelions you can pick.
It gets back to the point you were making before, right? Like the reality is we're not struggling as bad as what we were struggling 50, 60 years ago. That the life here is still very high quality and still probably too good, that it's almost like you have to feel a little bit more pain to get involved at a deeper level, right?
Yeah. But even feeling pain, you still need direction and hope and structure. And that's what we want to do at People First. And I don't know if we can get there on our own, but even if One Nation started branches because we did. So that's lifting the standard already.
What I'd like you to do, Jared, is we've already hit 12 o'clock, believe it or not. And I know you're on that time schedule. Is last podcast, we had 76,000 views.
Yeah.
Right. When you put that into perspective, that's 80% of the MCG.
Yeah.
So what I want you to do right now is think about that and think about you being in the middle of the MCG on a stage.
Yeah.
Right. With a microphone. And you've got 80,000 people around you.
Yeah.
And I want you to look down the barrel of the camera. Right. And tell them what you want them to hear from you and what can change their mind, whether it's talk about your, few policies or just give them some words of wisdom, because hopefully we can get more views on this one. But basically that's the people that are going to be watching you right now.
And what you need them to do to support you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, look, as I say to everyone, and I deliberately made these first two words of my maiden speech was self-belief. I'm a big believer in self-belief. You've got to believe in yourself before, because the worst thing that can kill a country, and we're seeing this now, is people becoming very despondent and they're giving up hope. And they shouldn't be. They should be drawing inspiration from our forefathers. That's why when people ask me, why did I run for politics? It's like, because I'm driven by the gratitude I have towards our forefathers who made so many sacrifices to give us opportunities. I want to make sure we give our children the same opportunities our forefathers gave to us. We still live in a great country, as we just pointed out, right? Give me the green grass of a backyard any day over the living in a 15th level of a high rise, and I don't care how new flash it's built. It's still better than living in Dubai, right? So we live in a wonderful country, and we've got to believe in ourselves. We've got to believe in our country, and we've got to believe in the future. In terms of the actual sales pitches, I would say to people, we have the solutions, we have the know-how, and we have the vision. And all of that has come from knowledge and understanding of how our country has got to where we are today. 200 years ago, people went out into the bush, and they had to build up, agriculture. We had our people discover, gold, whatever. They had farmers with their wool, but they kept persisting. Right, we have faced fires, floods, and droughts. We've faced warfare. We've had to fight. Life isn't easy. It's wealth for toil. That's why we have it in our national anthem. That's why I love our national anthem. But the thing is just don't give up. Fighting. Don't think, that the world, is getting you down. And that's that thing is that self-belief, because that will drive people to then go out and do something. But yet again, if you are happy with politics in this country, turn up to, join a party, www.peoplefirstparty.au. Click on the membership. It's $50 a year. And make a movement, because if we want to get to, we've got over 3,000 members now. It'd be great to think we could get to 200,000 members. But as I said, and even if you can't be active in the party because you've got a busy life, even if you're inactive, but you just pay $50 a year, it all helps towards getting to raising enough money to pay for candidates. I mean, it's going to cost you $1.5 million to run a bare basics campaign at the federal level. But we have to get out, and if you're on social media 10 hours a week, cut it back to 8 hours, and that 2 hours you save, go to a political meeting or go to a P&F meeting, get involved with your community and interact with people as well, because that's really, really important. Face to face, because social media is very polarizing. And this is one of the things we want to do at People First, is actually get out and talk to people on a collaborative basis. Because when you're face to face, people will listen, they're more respectful, and we want to bring that back as well. But look, long story short, we live in a great country, and we owe it to our children to make sure that it stays a great country. And certainly at People First, that's what we're determined to do.
What's the best way of getting in contact with you through Facebook? What's your Facebook?
Just if you want to contact me directly, contact@peoplefirstparty.au. That's our email.
Yeah, and it's Gerard Rennick.
No, .au, no, .com.
No, okay,
yeah.
cool.
And it's Gerard Rennick on Facebook, correct?
Gerard Rennick, People First Party. Gerard Rennick, yeah, so we're on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, or X, sorry, Instagram, and, YouTube.
So might put all those in the show notes. That's a big mouthful.
Is in order to sign up for the $50 membership, is it peoplefirst.au as well?
Yeah, peoplefirstparty.au.
Well, I'll after the show, I'll be signing up.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate that.
Jared, thank you very much for your time again. Honestly, we've interviewed a lot of different types of people over the last couple of years. We've interviewed a fair few politicians, a fair few people in the political area that aren't actual politicians. And you're probably one of the top intellects, I feel, that we've had on, just with the amount of knowledge that you know and history. I can see the passion, I can feel the energy.
Yeah.
You don't have to be doing this, but you're fighting. And like you said, you're trying to build a machine to take over the machine. So wish you the best of luck with it. Thank you very much from Mark, James, and I, and the Unemployable crew. And hopefully we'll get you on in the future again.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's been a pleasure. And always happy to come back on again. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Unemployable. If you'd like to watch another episode, just click there.